first left the San Antonio Medical Center, what was like your first, let's say, month or so when you're just getting back into the world? Like, what was it like for you?
So I was down there for 3 years. When I got out of the hospital after 6 months, so I lived down there for another 2.5 years after I got out. I did not want to go into public because of the way I looked. I had a hard time. There's going to be some stories I tell tonight that go into that. But I was afraid to go out in public. When finally my mom signed me up for a trip in Houston, and I didn't want to go, but she had signed me up, so I figured I would. And of course, this trip, they were sending the bus out with 4 wounded warriors. They were bringing a bus out from Houston, bringing it to San Antonio. We're all going to get on the bus and go to this amazing event for wounded warriors. So the bus gets there to the hospital, and there's no wheelchair lift, and I'm in a wheelchair, and so are like 3 other guys. So thankfully, that day when I heard I was going on this trip, I was so paranoid that they weren't going to have a wheelchair lift that I learned how to brace myself, because at the time my hands were really weak, I had no wrist motion at all. I learned how to push myself up the stairs of the bus so I knew I could go. And thankfully I did, because there was no wheelchair ramp on it. And that was one of the first times that I went out in public, and that's when I actually told somebody I wanted to do public speaking. And I think I was lying, honestly, when I said that. And I think I was just saying what I felt like I was supposed to say to this guy. And he's like, okay, we'll help you get into it. I was like, oh God, what am I doing? Because I was an absolute horrible public speaker before my injury. Absolutely terrible, horrified of getting in front of anybody to talk. And now I can get in front of anybody and talk. I have no problem with it. But I told him that, and I went to a church a couple weeks later, and I got up in front of this group, and I talked. I had this piece of paper that I wrote some stuff down on, forgot that I had the piece of paper when I got up there, and just rambled for about 10 minutes. And at the end, I have no clue what I said to this group, but I realized that this group of people were like in awe of what I said, and I have no idea what I said, so I don't know how good it was. But I realized that people actually were going to listen to what I had to say, and there's not many people that have that ability, and I'm very lucky to be able to have that. I'm lucky to have this story that can grab people's attention. So that's why that was a life-changing moment for me. That's why I ended up getting up on stage and talking to people, because of that moment. And so that trip was like my first getting out of the house, getting into the public, and realizing that everything was going to be okay. Yeah.
What did you think, like, when you were in the hospital and you had just had all these injuries happen to you? Were you, like, you didn't know what you were going to do with your life? Were you really sad? Were you like, oh, I'm just happy to be alive? Like, what was going through your head?
When I was in the hospital, it was every emotion you can imagine. Every single one. It was horrible depression at times. Terrible depression. It was anxiety. All night long, I would lay in bed and I would kick my legs and move my arms because my muscles hadn't been used in so long. So my muscles were like acting up, and I would lay there till like 5 in the morning watching SpongeBob. Because there's nothing else on TV at 5 in the morning except for SpongeBob in the hospital. I found that out. Horrible. So I would lay there in my bed watching SpongeBob and kicking my legs and kicking my arm, or moving my arms all night long. Yeah, that sounds horrible, doesn't it? So then 5 in the morning I would finally fall asleep, and then the doctor would come and wake me up. But yeah, I went through every single thing. I struggled with faith. I struggled with a lot of different things. And there wasn't one single moment that changed it. It was time. I had to let time take over and eventually, feel better. And I still struggle with things, but I allow myself to do it as long as I don't let it take over more than a moment. If I let it take over a day, it's too long. It's taking too much of your time. Because So once it gets into that day, it could follow you into the next day. Yeah, I go through frustrations, but you gotta get over those things quick. And if you don't, they linger with you. They could last way too long. Yes.
Were there any programs or anything that you were like told about or given access to while you were in the hospital when you got out to help through this process?
Not so much in the hospital, but after the hospital, after I got out of the hospital, there was, honestly, the biggest program for me was being around other wounded guys. When I was in the hospital, you were in your room most of the time, so you didn't get to see these other guys. We got out of the hospital, we went to the Center for the Intrepid, and the rehab in the hospital, and we got to spend time with these other wounded guys, and that was the best medicine I've ever had. There was one time, there was a guy who was in a wheelchair. Wake up! Hey. Hey, you're good. You're good.
I apologize.
No, you're fine. Don't worry about it. I just had to call you out for a second. Hey, you kidding me? When I was in the Army,
I'm so sorry.
you're good. Don't worry. Don't worry. I was just gonna call you out, and then you're good now.
Well, I deserve it, so.
You're good. And listen, when we were in classrooms in the Army, I fell asleep more than anybody else. They used to call me Pooh Bear because I would be sitting in the corner with my head down against my chest, passed out cold. Don't worry about it. You're good. Hey, come here. It's not, just because people made noise doesn't mean that it's over. Yeah. So there was this one guy who was missing both legs and an arm, and I mean that sounds horrible. That sounds like something that would be impossible to overcome. He came up to me one day and he's like, you know, you've been my inspiration this entire time. This kid that was missing both legs and an arm, so basically he had one arm. He told me that he was my inspiration, and I couldn't believe he said that because to me, he was the inspiration for me the entire time I was there. So we were all feeding off of each other and didn't even really realize it. We all thought everybody else's wounds were so much worse than ours. In my opinion, somebody with PTSD has it 100 times worse than I will ever have it. Because when I look in the mirror, even though I don't look the same as I did when I was before I deployed, I still know who I am. I still know I'm Rick. These guys with PTSD, they look in the mirror and they see themselves, or they see what they think is themselves. They look the same as when they left, but they don't know who they are anymore. And that stinks. So what I went through, in my opinion, was nothing compared to what these guys with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries are. When I tell people, people ask me questions about my injuries, I tell them what you see is what you get. My injuries are all on the outside, thankfully. I have nothing internal. I'm still Rick.
Do you still keep in contact with those group of guys that you became so close with in the hospital through rehabilitation and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
I still talk to a lot of them. Facebook, thankfully, is like the biggest help for all of us. That's the only. Have anybody ever heard of MySpace? Okay, I wasn't sure. It's old now, but I had. The only reason I got MySpace was so that I could keep in contact with my buddies, and now obviously that's obsolete, and I don't even know if there is a MySpace anymore. But yeah, I still talk to a lot of them, and it's sad because a lot of them, the guys I served with over in Iraq, aren't doing that well because of PTSD, and that stinks to watch that happen. Yeah.
You said you got cholera in your lungs, so what exactly does that do to your body?
Honestly, like, it was something they hadn't really even seen before. When they got to the States, they were like, holy cow, cholera, we don't deal with that. But it was such a minor issue that it was like, they treated it real quick because we have the stuff to treat that stuff without, really fast. And it wasn't even like a thought. I just went through my records and it was just a little blurb in there that I had cholera. And myself, I don't remember what happened to me at the time because I was so out of it.